Hi, everyone. My name is Keith Fudge, and I direct Urban's Upward Mobility Framework project. On behalf of the whole team at Urban, I'd like to extend a warm welcome and thank you for being here. I'm thrilled to share that we've had more than 1,300 people register for today's event. Joining us today are city and county officials, representatives from local nonprofits and foundations, state governments, national organizations and advocates, businesses and employers, philanthropists, researchers, and many others working to improve the well-being of people around the country. It's inspiring to see so many people from across sectors and fields and practices come together with a common interest and focus on upward mobility. While many of you have been following and contributing to Urban's work on economic and social mobility from poverty for years now, for others, it's the first time you're really hearing about the upward mobility framework. We are so excited that each of you are here with us today to mark a big milestone for our team as we kick off a new phase and opportunity in the evolution of our work to support and accelerate efforts across the US to increase upward mobility and racial equity for people and communities. So before we jump in, just a few notes of housekeeping. This event is being recorded. The recording and relevant links will be posted online after the event and can be found on the event page. You can find speaker biographies and slides on our website. And I think those are going to get dropped into the chat. Live captions are turned on. To turn them off, please click the live transcripts button at the bottom of your screen. All participants are muted, so please feel free to type questions into the Q&A box at any time. We will also have dedicated audience Q&A sessions at the end of each of our 2 panel discussions today. Have a few requests for you all. First is that you please complete our survey at the end of the event to share your feedback on what went well and what you'd like to see in the future. Next, later in the event, we'll be sharing about upcoming opportunities to get involved. So if you're interested in being notified when these launch, please register to receive updates on the Upward Mobility Framework Project website. And we'll provide links for the event survey and registration form later on. And finally, if you would like to join the conversation on Twitter, please use the hashtag #LiveAtUrban. So with logistics behind us, I'll quickly share a little on what to expect from our speakers today. In our first session, Urban's Marjorie Turner will give an overview of the upward mobility framework and how it supports local leaders to create the conditions that can increase upward mobility and racial equity in their communities. Then we'll have 2 panels to hear from partners who are using the framework, its tools, and resources in their work. We're excited to have these leaders with us today. But to start us off, I'd like to introduce Kosar Jahani, Senior Program Officer at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. We're so grateful to Kosar for her thought leadership on this work and the ongoing support and partnership that she and the Foundation's entire economic mobility and opportunity team have provided to help bring us to this exciting moment. Thanks for joining us today, Kosar, to provide a welcome.
Thank you, Keith, and hi, everyone. Really delighted to be here. It's a pleasure. As Keith mentioned, my name is Kosar Jahani, and I currently work at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation on our Economic Mobility and Opportunity team. For any of you that may have been following the Foundation's work in the US, you'll know that for many years, the Foundation has been exclusively focused on educational outcomes all across the learner journey, everything from early learning to kindergarten to K-12 and up to college access. But as you all probably know, and as the research and evidence suggests, in today's America, education alone is not nearly enough to ensure that Americans would experience upward mobility both within their lifetimes and across generations. And that's where the Foundation's interest has come into play. Dating back to 2016, we started interrogating the persistence of poverty in the US and the lack of upward mobility that was starting to be seen through some data analysis, most notably the work of Raj Shetty and the Opportunity Atlas. And that's when we first partnered with Urban to launch a partnership on mobility from poverty. I know Marge is going to discuss that in a bit more detail, so I won't go into too much there. But what I will say is very early on in our work and thinking about upward mobility, when we were deciding who our main stakeholders would be as an initiative of the Foundation, we landed on local government leaders. So you all. We know very clearly from research in the space that local conditions, and I would even call them micro-local conditions down to a child's zip code and their neighborhood, they play such a huge part in their life trajectories as adults. And that's where all of you come into play and the extreme level of influence you have on those local conditions. Our team has spent the last few years devoting a substantial amount of resources to build out and really refine the evidence, the data, and tools that can help local leaders increase upward mobility in their communities. And so all the work you'll see showcased here today is the culmination of multiple years of this effort, starting around 2017 and in continued partnership with Urban Institute, but always with a lot of local leaders at the helm. We've done a lot of testing with actual government officials to arrive at this point. And I would say it's a milestone for us, but we're really excited about what happens next. So I want to say I'm really grateful for your time today to learn about these resources, and even more excited for what comes next as you continue to engage with them and share your feedback with Urban and the rest of the group of folks that are working on these. So thank you so much for your time and energy and being here today, and I'll turn it back to Keith.
Thank you so much, Kosar. And now Marjorie will kick us off with the framework.
Thanks loads, Keith and Kosar. It's really a pleasure to be in this virtual room with such a fabulous mix of people doing the hard work on the ground of improving conditions and boosting people's opportunities for upward mobility. I'm excited to share an overview of the upward mobility framework before we hear from partners who are using it in communities across the country. And in this overview, I'm going to tell you a little bit about how we developed the framework to support local leaders boosting upward mobility and equity. And then I'll introduce some of the tools available for applying it. So I think it's really widely understood now that rates of economic mobility in the United States have stagnated, really casting doubt on the American ideal that kids can grow up to do better than their parents, and that hard work pays off with economic success and security. But while that stagnation, I think, is well recognized, too often mobility from poverty is still viewed as primarily a matter of individual ability, individual hard work, individual choices, when in fact, people experiencing poverty face a web of obstacles that often undermine their best efforts. And in particular, racial prejudice, discrimination, and segregation have created profound and persistent barriers to upward mobility for people of color. The COVID-19 pandemic really laid bare these structural inequities in the conditions that affect people's health, their security, and the opportunities available to them. Many local leaders across the country have committed to the really hard work of dismantling these barriers and building systems that support upward mobility and advance greater equity. But to build public will and inform action, communities need metrics they can use to assess current conditions and monitor their progress over time. It can take decades to observe whether the patterns of upward mobility are changing over a kid's lifetime or from one generation to the next. But there's good research that identifies key conditions essential for boosting upward mobility and narrowing racial and ethnic inequities. So our upward mobility framework aims to provide local leaders with metrics they can use for assessing these key conditions in the short and medium term, along with some tools to help apply those metrics to support local planning efforts. So as Kosar mentioned, this framework really builds upon work that started with the U.S. Partnership on Mobility from Poverty, which convened a group of the nation's most brilliant thinkers and doers who met over the course of 2 years to explore the fundamental question, what would it take to dramatically increase mobility from poverty in the United States? And among many terrific contributions from that group was a new and compelling definition of upward mobility. The partners argued that mobility entails more than just economic success. Certainly, economic success is critical, but true upward mobility requires that people have autonomy and power, the ability to make choices for themselves and to influence the policies and practices that shape opportunities available to them. And it also requires that people can enjoy the dignity, the respect of being valued for their contributions to their families, to their work, to their communities. This broad conception of upward mobility really inspires our thinking and our work, and we found that it resonates with many other actors in communities across the country. So starting in 2019, with that three-part definition in mind, Urban assembled a cross-disciplinary working group of scholars, and together we systematically reviewed the research on factors that block or boost mobility from poverty. And we reached a broad consensus on a framework of predictors and metrics that are supported by strong evidence and that can be influenced by state and local practices. So here you see a summary of the framework development process. After working with that scholarly working group, we vetted their findings, their conclusions with hundreds of stakeholders from the nonprofit, government, business, and philanthropic sectors. And we beta tested the resulting set of metrics with partners in 8 counties over 18 months. And I'll come back to that beta testing process with a few more words in a couple of minutes. But that beta testing experience then informed a revised, updated framework and metrics that was released late last year. So I'm going to walk through the layers of this upward mobility framework from the top down to help you understand what each layer means and how they all fit together. So we start with that 3-part definition of mobility from poverty. We see all 3 as essential dimensions of success. Strategies and actions should drive toward that combo of dimensions of upward mobility from poverty. Next layer, there's strong evidence showing that local communities aspiring to boost upward mobility for their residents should focus on building or bolstering 5 essential pillars, pillars of support that people need to achieve their aspirations for economic success, power, and dignity. Neighborhoods play a central role in supporting families' ability, in supporting family stability and well-being over time, their access to social and economic opportunities, and their kids' chances to thrive. Education from preschool through post-secondary provides a crucial avenue to both economic and social mobility. Jobs and wages constitute the primary source of income and economic security for most people in the US today, and the starting point for wealth building. And good health helps people of all ages surmount life's challenges, excel in school and on the job, ensure their family's well-being, and participate fully in their communities. And finally, governance that is attentive to the needs of all community members and residents who are engaged meaningfully in decision-making are hallmarks of a community that supports upward mobility. So today, in many communities across the US, one or more of those essential pillars is failing for people experiencing poverty. And even when these pillars function pretty effectively for some people, they often fail for people of color and for other marginalized groups, thereby sustaining and increasing inequities. So combating persistent racial inequities across all 5 pillars is central to supporting upward mobility for everyone in our country. Now, for each of those 5 pillars, our scholarly working group identified a short list of key predictors that reflect the performance of the pillar in the short and medium term. And evidence strongly associates these predictors with long-term upward mobility for children, for youth, for adults. And these are the conditions that can be influenced by local and state policy. Then for each predictor, we defined one, or in some cases, a couple of metrics communities can use to measure local performance. This slide just shows the metrics for the opportunity-rich and inclusive neighborhoods pillar. And just to illustrate, to measure housing stability, we compute the number and share of school kids experiencing homelessness over the course of a year. So we selected well-established metrics that can be calculated for localities nationwide and updated every few years. Now, these metrics are by no means perfect. They aren't comprehensive. They don't tell you everything you need to know about what's working or not working locally in the housing stability space or in any of these other pillars. But they provide a really valuable starting point, an important signaling function that helps call attention to areas of particular strength or concern that you might want to dig into more closely. And they can also help you keep your eye on the big picture, on the interconnections between policies in these 5 pillars, rather than getting myopically focused on one domain that may be critically important, but isn't going to be able to solve the mobility challenge by itself. So taken together, the mobility metrics can help you compare conditions in your community to neighboring communities or other comparable communities. They can help reveal those structural barriers that may be blocking people's efforts or contributing to inequity. They can help you prioritize areas of action that have the greatest potential for impact in your community. As I said before, they can keep highlighting interconnections between pillars, between policy domains. They can help you set targets. How much do we want to improve the performance of this pillar over what time horizon? And finally, they can enable you to monitor your progress along the way, learning about what's working and what's not working, and making mid-course corrections. So we've made all these metrics available at the web address here on the screen for all counties in the United States and all cities with populations over 75,000. And back in May, we offered a training webinar on using these data tables. And the recording of that session is on our website if you weren't able to attend or you want a refresher. And I think the link to that recording is going to come into the chat at some time in this session. So as I mentioned earlier, in order to test the utility of the framework and the metrics for local decision makers, we partnered with 8 county governments, our upward mobility cohort, to explore how the metrics could inform their work to develop mobility action plans that lay out local strategies for boosting upward mobility and advancing equity. This partnership recognized that the hard work of crafting local strategies to boost mobility and equity takes a lot more than data. It requires coalition building with partners across sectors and policy domains. It requires deep and meaningful community engagement, and it requires the addition of local data and knowledge to provide a really full and nuanced understanding of strengths and challenges in a given community. But readily available metrics can be a key catalyst, a key ingredient for a strategic planning effort. After a huge amount of work, counties in the cohort released mobility action plans last year in which they outlined strategic actions designed to systematically target and improve the community level supports people need to achieve upward mobility from poverty. We learned so much from working with these counties, and their feedback has helped refine the framework that I shared today. And later this afternoon, you'll be hearing from 3 of these counties about their experience, what they learned, and where they're taking the work forward. So our partnership with the Upward Mobility Cohort also informed a planning guide that we developed to help local leaders in other communities undertake similar mobility action planning processes. This planning guide is informed by the experience of the cohort counties, as well as by research on systems change and evidence-based decision-making. And it helps local leaders better understand the impediments to upward mobility and how to build a cross-sector team that can plan, advocate for, and implement a set of systems changes. The planning guide also takes the framework another step forward and suggests a set of guiding principles and a set of critical actors who are likely to have essential insights, resources, or capacities to contribute. So that in a nutshell is the upward mobility framework. And I'm really delighted now to hand off to Kimberly Burrows to introduce our first panel of local actors pushing this work forward in communities across the country. Thanks.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Marge, and hello to everyone. We have an exciting first panel prepared for you all today. As Marge said, my name is Kimberly Burrows, and I'll be inviting 2 local leaders to join me up here on the virtual couch to discuss how their organizations have been advancing upward mobility and racial equity. We will particularly focus on some of the ways to use the resources that you all just heard about within the upward mobility framework so that you can be equipped to also drive local change. As I'm in conversation with our panelists, I want to welcome everyone in the audience to raise any questions you have for our speakers using the Q&A box at the bottom of your Zoom screen. I'll ensure to save some time for us to share your questions with the speakers, and we'll respond to any of those that we can. So let's get started. First of all, I would like to introduce Aqua Porter. Aqua is the Executive Director of the Rochester-Monroe Anti-Poverty Initiative, RMAPI for short, which is based in Rochester, New York. RMAPI is a collective impact organization focused on increasing upward mobility and prosperity for the city of Rochester and Monroe County residents. Now, I'd like to introduce our second panelist, Erica Greenlee. Erica is a Vice President of Economic Mobility at Feeding America, the largest hunger relief organization in the United States. Erica focuses on addressing food security over the long term by supporting economic mobility pathways for neighbors and communities facing hunger. Aqua and Erica, thank you for joining us today. We are excited to learn more about how you and your organizations have been examining opportunities for residents to move and stay out of poverty. Great, we're very excited for this conversation. So just to start us off, can you both briefly share how the themes of upward mobility and racial equity are core to your work? And Erica, I want to toss this question over to you first.
Sure. Hi, Kimberly, Aqua, everyone. Great to be with you today. Happy to be a part of this conversation. The themes of upward mobility and equity are really, they're baked into our DNA. One of the things, the Feeding America Network is 200 food banks across the country that deliver food through 60,000 agencies to tens of millions of people. So we are absolutely committed to providing food today to people who need it. We are also committed to ending hunger in the long term. And we know that that will take more than charitable food, right? That will take revitalizing local food systems. It will take housing and workforce development and jobs and transportation and daycare, all of the things that go into upward mobility. And so from our perspective, upward mobility is a pathway to ending hunger. And so it is central to our goal. And we share this with so many of us on the call today. I think it's a really, it's a rallying cry for all of us. In the equity lens, we know that 1 in 5 Black and Native Americans face hunger in comparison with 1 in 15 white Americans. To be clear, no one should be food insecure, but the racial disparities are glaring. And so equity has to be a part of the solution. It just has to be central. And it is for us. As we think about addressing ending hunger, we've adopted a yes and approach, where we're looking to leverage our food distribution network, other assets that we have, to partner with others for more holistic and long-term impact, right? And this is where this framework kind of helps us all work together, right? One of the mantras that we've heard from food banks is the movement from transactional to transformational. And I think the question for all of us is, how can we get to that transformational impact? And upward mobility and equity are right dead center in that effort.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Erica. Really the centrality of the work that you're doing. And I like that you frame that as a rally call. Aqua, I want to invite you to talk about some of these themes as part of our MAPI's work.
Yeah, thank you so much. And so glad to be here. Certainly sharing this panel with Erica is really wonderful. So thank you for the opportunity. So at the Rochester Monroe Anti-Poverty Initiative, we've really reframed our theory of change to focus on upward mobility versus anti-poverty. And we're heartened because upward mobility reflects an asset-based, more hopeful, future-forward opportunity for creating pathways to upward mobility. And we seem to be really getting compelling support for this approach. And so we are very pleased with the way that our community has rallied around the principles for upward mobility. And we're really beginning to really look at how do we embed them in everything we're doing. So we're reframing our narrative, we're rebranding kind of the work that we're doing. We've just released our common agenda, which we have named a unity agenda because it really unifies our community around the aspirations that we believe are embedded in the upward mobility kind of principles. And so it is core to all of the work that we're doing going forward. Mm-hmm. I would say the core principles around racial equity have been influenced in, as we introduced a new unity agenda, we also took a look at our guiding principles and we tweaked them a bit to be a little bit more relevant and a little bit more practical things that we could actually practice and do. And so our original guiding principle around addressing structural racism became center racial equity. And so we are looking at everything with that lens of being able to disaggregate data, evaluate effectiveness, and how do we move forward with that racial lens, at least first in the work that we're doing.
Thank you so much, Aqua. And, really that clear tone that you had set out in the beginning of saying that this is something that needs to be community driven, I believe really speaks to the fact that we don't want this just to sit as a guide. We don't want this to sit as just metrics in a report. We're really trying to drive local action. And so to kind of follow up on what you're both saying right now, when you came across the upward mobility framework, the planning guide for local action, the mobility metrics, all the various pieces that Marge has spoken to us about today, I'm curious what you thought. Why is this suite of resources compelling for both you and your organization's approach? And what lens does it bring that is new or different to your work? And Aqua, I want to start out with you just to talk a little bit more about the unity agenda and just how does this upward mobility framework really fit nicely in some of the pieces that you're working on?
So the three-part definition of upward mobility was a game changer, I think, for us, because we recognized that there was a gap in kind of what we were doing, and it was kind of unarticulated. Like I think we felt that there was something that wasn't quite complete. And the extension to upward mobility being more than just around economic success, but this idea that that people who really wanted to move up out of poverty and stay out of poverty also would be enhanced and by having power and autonomy, right? By being able to understand how important it was to be able to make your own decisions about your life, to be able to participate in your community's decision-making. Like, those are things that I think we didn't recognize as having the same level of importance. And now we recognize that those are really important things to work on as well as dignity and belonging, which I think we just kind of maybe saw as a nice to have, but not an absolutely critical component. And so it brings all those things forward, right, to the surface and makes all of them kind of equally important. And so we are working to say that we need all of these conditions, these factors they're interconnected, and people need to be able to substantially experience all of those things in order to be able to rise out of poverty and stay out of poverty.
Thanks so much for sharing that, Aqua. You know, what I'm really hearing from that is just like the 3-part definition ends up being 3 equal parts that leads to this whole. And so really happy to hear some of your reflections there. Eric, I want to turn to you. What were some of your immediate thoughts when you saw this suite of resources?
So I'm going to echo Aqua here that the 3-part definition was really helped us think more deeply about what we were doing. From my perspective on the economic mobility portfolio, it really, I think there are actually probably 4 discrete ways that it added value to our thinking. The first was it provided the language and captured the intention of things that food banks were moving towards. And having that language is so important, right? To be able to lean into it and go deeper. I'll give you some examples. There are several dozen food banks that are providing workforce development on site in the form of culinary and warehouse training. There are food banks that are investing in local and BIPOC farmers in important ways. There are food banks who are really leaning into local power with advocacy training and organizing, and having the framework really captured that intention and allowed us to articulate it in a way that allows us to formalize it even more, right? So that's the first thing. The second thing, the measures and the tools, right? It's so much easier to have that as a starting place. So very pragmatically, it was useful to have those kinds of resources. I think, and again, this echoes, Aqua, what you were talking about. My favorite piece of this is that the 3-part definition allowed us to kind of customize how we're thinking about a theory of change. And for us, it looks like food security is not sustainable without economic success. Economic success is not sustainable without power and autonomy and systems change. And none of that matters if you aren't really leaning into dignity and belonging in an equity lens. And so the best frameworks really align with your values and your actions and allow you to really think more deeply about them and lean into the structure more. And that's what's happening here with us. The last thing I'll say, and this is a little bit aspirational, but I think this conversation hopefully can spur us forward, is that I'm hopeful that it will provide for us a common ground with other organizations who are using the same framework and the same language and maybe even the same measures. And we all know it's just so much easier to collaborate and play and partner with folks when you have that level of common ground. So it really added a lot of value to our thinking. We're hoping it'll continue to add value to our partnerships.
Great. Thanks so much, Erica, especially that piece about, springboard in the collaboration. I think that's, really important. And I want to stay on this point a little bit more and just talk about Feeding America from a national organization perspective and thinking that, there are hundreds of members spread across the country, and you're thinking about these key pieces around formalizing practices, your theory of change. So, thinking about all these resources that we're talking about today, how would you advise others that are working towards these comprehensive long-term strategies to be able to also use the framework in all of its magnitude for some of those localized benefits?
It's such a good question. I think that the first answer to, where do you start in operationalizing something is always listen to and partner with the local communities, right? Begin in relationship with the people that you are in service of. And regardless of what you're doing or where you're going, that's central, right? I think building on that and bringing in the framework, there are really two ways that we're thinking about and operationalizing this. The first, and Aqua, again, I'm just echoing what you said, but it's great to see how much we have in common in terms of how we're using this. One way is to make sure that you're integrating the framework into your existing work, right? Everything you do should have a lens for, are you promoting local power? Are you promoting dignity and belonging, right? Everything needs to have that embedded. Two is about really creating new efforts that explicitly promote local power and explicitly get to dignity and belonging. In the context of the Feeding America network, the integration can mean so many different things, right? It can mean providing environments for neighbors to choose their food instead of having locally prepared boxes when possible. It can mean providing food that is culturally preferred to really honor people's heritage and foster that sense of belonging. It can mean, embracing trauma-informed care approaches in terms of the neighbor experience. I think the point here is really, again, back to that mantra of going from transactional to transformational, right? How can every guest come to a food bank pantry and feel welcomed and empowered? And that can start to go a long way in terms of the integration. In terms of the new kind of strategies explicitly focused on this, we have a number of things. There's one I'll mention, which is the Food Security Equity Impact Fund. And this is a fund where Feeding America is really deliberately investing in local communities of color that have experienced disinvestment over time in their local food systems and in other systems. The goal here is to provide resources to local leaders for local solutions and local ideas for how they see really addressing systemic inequities. And being able to provide those kinds of resources, investing in local capacity building, local decision-making, I think is really where this work is going, right? We've for a long time as an industry have applied lots of programs, and I think it's time for us to share resources and power and really invest in the assets of our local communities and local leaders. This again is part of making sure that everything is integrated and you add on some things that really help to move the needle.
Thanks so much for sharing that, Erica, especially talking about this integrated approach and really ensuring that's localized. I think that's absolutely critical if we're talking about sustaining these strategies, and also some of the key components of the planning guide for local action as folks check those out. Aqua, I want to turn to you, really thinking about our MAPI as an anti-poverty regional convener. One of the key things that we wanted to do is when we were coupling the upward mobility framework with this pathway of doing the work, that's why we wanted to publish our planning guide for local action. And so when that guide landed in your inbox, what were the parts that you found most valuable for your regional work in Rochester? And where do you also think aspirationally, you really see those future opportunities for its use?
So thank you for asking the question. First of all, I just want to go back and kind of reinforce what Erica said that I think was really important for us too, which is that the planning guide and the framework gave us language. It made it feel as though we could define objectively some of the work that we were doing and help people understand where we were trying to go. The planning guide for us, our MAPI has been around since about 2015, and we've been a collective impact entity. So we've been doing the work as a collective, and we understand the framework of how to bring a coalition together and who needs to be there. The planning guide, though, reaffirmed that the organizational structure that we are, working under can be effective. And so we were able to kind of just look at that to say, as we move forward toward this new unity agenda work and this new theory of change, can we take any of the lessons that are here and update our structure, or, think about how we're doing the work. But a lot of those first early steps in the planning guide serve to really affirm that we had some good bones. The next areas, though, as we defined our theory of change pillars, which we have 6, which are very much aligned to the 5 in the framework, although we've added one on a call out on inclusion, dignity, and belonging, to make sure that we are focused as a community on how important that pillar, that theory of change is. We have then created more than 30 strategic outcomes that lie under all of those 6 pillars. And those outcomes are now the work that we are trying to, as a collective, identify how do we make progress on things like the housing system that'll offer affordable, safe, and desirable options, as the pillar is that everyone in our community should be able to live in a safe, inclusive, and opportunity-rich neighborhood. We are using the metrics and the idea of mobility metrics and that's the work that is really where we are today, identifying the mobility metrics, using those to help us both strategize and prioritize where we put our focus, ultimately monitor our work, compare ourselves to other communities like ours to see if there are things that we can learn there and maybe apply, or so that we don't have to all do the same work, but we can take lessons from other communities. And so that is really so valuable as a set of resources that we're using. The templates are amazing, so thorough, flexible, and then adaptable for a community that's kind of, I would say, in the second generation of its work.
Great, thank you so much, Aqua. And I really hope that everyone listening, they're catching what both Aqua and Erica are saying about being able to think about some of these resources as a skeleton for that local capacity building for decision making. So ensuring that, it's not just a one size fits all in that sense of you can just take it up as it is, but really being able to take the materials and to mold it into where your needs are, especially on that piece of thinking about power and autonomy. Now, I've been having a great conversation with Erica and Aqua so far, but I want to give the audience a chance to also ask some of your questions. So I'm going to pull a few from the Q&A list to pose to our panelists, and we'll just get the conversation going. So as you have other questions, please feel free to drop them in the box and we'll get to as many as we can. So we spoke a little bit about power and autonomy, and we spoke a lot about the importance of really thinking about the community as a partner here. And so both Aqua and Erica, could you just elaborate a little bit more about how you've been able to rally the community around this shared framework and metrics and the way that you're doing this work? How are you able to embed it as a planning process or any other mechanisms that you're able to use? And are the partners adopting it? If so, what does that look like? And where might there be some challenges in adoption? Would love you to talk through a few of these. And Aqua, I'm going to start out with you, and then we can flip over to Erica.
Sure. So first, let me start by saying that our collective is anchored in community members with lived experience being a part of our work. And we try to be very intentional to make sure that community members with lived experience are at the table and are in all of our processes. So when we went about updating our unity agenda and creating this upward mobility framework, we took these ideas to community. We got a lot of community feedback on the idea of upward mobility. They helped us to write our impact statement and rewrite our impact statement in ways that reflected what they thought was important. They have given us ways to think about our data. These mobility metrics, they are helping us to work through whether they're reflective of the community need or reflective of the important things that should be kind of considered in the community. And so our work is really anchored in their voice and their needs. And I think that it is sometimes seen as maybe a slow down in the process for those who are urgent to get to action, but really important to make sure that you have a coalition that can stay together.
So thank you so much, Aqua. Erica, over to you.
Alka, I love what you just said about it being a slowdown. I'm remembering a conversation we had with some local leaders a couple of years ago who actually, when they were starting this work, they were very clear that it was going to be disruptive and that slowing down a timeline or having to increase a budget to include more voices was actually a good reason to slow down, right? And so being open to the implications of the kind of disruption, the good disruption that this really gets to, I think is important. We have at the Feeding America National Office, we've been really trying to center voices of neighbors in a variety of ways. Last year, we did the largest study ever of food insecure neighbors, where we engaged 36,000 people to hear their voices in a variety of ways about what their barriers were. And one of the things, you know, all of us need to be really prepared. When you ask the question, you have to act on the answer, right? And so, as an example, one of the things that came back, which you know we've known for a long time from the research, but hearing it from the neighbors makes it resonate even more, is that housing is one of the biggest barriers to food security, right? Because of the impact on your budget. And so we've launched into thinking about how food banks and Feeding America can really think about how to support neighbors in housing stability. We're not going to become a housing organization, but we can be a connector, we can be a convener, we can do those other things. So I think it really comes down to listening very carefully to community and acting on what you hear, right? Even if it doesn't happen to be in your priorities, we need to make that change and be responsive.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, I totally resonate with that, and thinking about the community as partners. And we have another question that kind of aligns with ways in which we engage community members. And it's really thinking about the fact that there are several initiatives that partner with community members, and there are times where folks might be distrustful based on their past experiences. And you know, really specifically thinking about ways where residents may have been tokenized in the past, or there are grants and programs with these, you know, lofty promises, and you don't see the trickle down efforts or even incentives of some of the work that's happening. And so would love if you both could talk a little bit about how your organization has been able to do this work in partnership with the community in a way that starts to combat and also address some of these existing narratives that might already be there. And Erica, would you like to start us off with that?
Yeah, sure. It's such a deep question. And I'll say that our network of food banks has a real range of how they're wanting to partner more deeply with community. I think some are aware that of the distrust. And in some cases, you know, building back that trust is where they're starting, and really, and, you know, before asking, you know, people for things and before sort of coming in with solutions, really everything moves at the speed of trust. And that takes time. There are a number of activities. I'll say there are food banks who are hiring from within communities to have people literally at the table and on the staff who can represent the communities. There are a number of food banks who do speaker training and advocacy training and organizing in a way that really bring those voices to the fore. There are certainly a lot of ways. I mentioned that the Equity Impact Fund, where really investing in the communities without strings attached, I think is another role we can play. You know, certainly many of us are doing focus groups and surveys and those kinds of things, but I think part of this work is moving into deeper ongoing relationship with community. And one of the things, I'll just say one more thing, the list is so long, but I'll say that there are also you know, conversations about advisory boards and food banks who are really thinking about engaging more structurally with community. And that the question there is about the decision-making rights, right? Like, does the community have, are they just providing input, or they actually have the ability to make the decision? And we're trying to move where we can to really allowing the group, really enabling the group to have decision-making power.
Great, thanks, Erica. And Aqua, over to you, thinking about how do you build that trust?
So I think it takes time, and it's, you know, we have a model where we have a community advisory council and we have a cohort of single moms. Our single moms cohort is a group of moms who we get together with every month, and we really like blend them into the work that we're doing. And we also provide them with a space for them to address some of their own unique concerns in a place where, if we're helpful, we will try to be, but sometimes they just need a place where they can come together and talk. And so that group has been together since 2020. And so we have built relationships with them over time, but it is very much intentional. We also provide incentives for community members to be a part of the work that we're doing. We have a community advisory council who is about 12 members. They've been with us for about a year. Half of them actually sit out on our steering committee table. And in that role, and our steering committee is about 36. So our goal is to get at least 25% of our steering committee to be community members with lived experience. But each of those members has an equal vote as any other member at the table. And so we're trying to ensure that when we do have to vote on things, a lot of the work that we're doing is consensus, but when we do have to vote on things, that their voices are equal and that they can lift any of their concerns at the table in a way that feels comfortable for them, and then know that they'll be heard. But it is very much about continuing to reinforce that they are valued, that their contributions are important. We have one of our single moms actually who we nominated for a space on our New York State Child Poverty Task Force. She was ultimately appointed by the governor to the task force. And so she has a voice. She is one of 2 community with lived member experiences on a task force that I think is around 40 people. So we're just trying to make sure that where we can, we help community members with lived experience use their power and their voice to make sure that their concerns are being addressed.
That's such a terrific example of really engaging folks with lived and living experience and ensuring that they don't just have a seat at the table, but they can also chair the meeting too. Really talking about holding space. And we are actually right up at time. We had so many different themes that we were able to talk about today. I just want to ensure that the audience takes away that we spoke about disruptors and how you can use some of these resources to be that positive disruptor in your neighborhood. Thinking about moving at the speed of trust, ensuring that the community is a valid partner that's at the table. Also ensuring that a lot of the work that we do is asset-based, and we're moving from that transactional to transformational approach. These are some of the key nuggets that Erica and Aqua had spoken about today, and really hope that as you dig into the materials, you're starting to see ways in which you can also drive local action in doing some of this work. So with that, I would like to thank Aqua and Erica for joining us in conversation today. They provided such a wealth of insights of how to lift up some of these lessons and guidance to do work that's happening in communities right now. Any of those resources that either of them or we at Urban have mentioned, you can find that on our website. All that information is being dropped in the chat. And so now it's my pleasure to turn over to my colleague, Martha Fedorowicz, who will be facilitating the next panel on lessons learned from the beta cohort. So Martha, over to you.
Thanks so much, Kimberly. Hi, everybody. My name is Martha Fedorowicz, and I'm a Training and Technical Assistance Manager in the Research to Action Lab at Urban and part of our Upward Mobility team. Thank you so much for staying with us. For our next panel, we have 3 incredible individuals, Beth, Ben, and Stephen, who were part of our Upward Mobility cohort, and they're excited to speak with you and share their experience with you. The cohort, as Marge mentioned earlier on, was comprised of teams from 8 county governments across the country and their cross-sector partners. These teams received 18 months of technical assistance from Urban to use the mobility metrics and the upward mobility framework in an upward mobility planning process. And at the end of that time, each team put forth a set of strategies to really boost mobility from poverty in their communities. So, and you can find those plans on our website. So now I will just let each of our panelists briefly introduce themselves, and then we'll go into questions. So let's go with Stephen first, then Ben, and then Beth.
Thank you, Martha. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Stephen Bader. I'm the Executive Director of the East Bay Economic Development Alliance, or East Bay EDA. We do lots of things in our region, but we're also attached to the County of Alameda and have administrative support from the County Administrator's Office, and one of our chairs, actually one of our members of our Board of Supervisors. So that's why I'm here today. Thank you.
Thanks, Stephen.
Martha, can you hear me all right?
All good?
Great. Ben Mendez, I'm the Deputy Chief of Staff here at the Office of the Deputy Mayor for Planning and Economic Development in the district. Our office does a lot of economic strategy work and is well known for real estate and business attraction, but we've been working a lot more on resident economic mobility and resident economic development, and this opportunity let us a chance to kind of lead on that work a little bit more. So excited to talk about that today.
Thanks, Ben.
Afternoon, everybody. My name is Beth McConnell. I'm the Director of Policy for the City of Philadelphia's Office of Community Empowerment and Opportunity. We go by CEO for short, and we're the City of Philadelphia's Community Action Agency, but we're also part of city government. So our mission is to advance upward mobility for Philadelphia residents with a lens on racial equity. And it's great to be with you all and great to see you again, Martha.
Thanks, everybody. So just again, for our audience members, please feel free to drop any questions you have for our panelists in the Q&A chat, and we will try to answer a few of those at the end. So my first question for all of you panelists is, why did you or your community apply to work with Urban on this Upward Mobility Framework project? There are lots of frameworks out there. There are lots of tools. What about this one was compelling to you? And we just heard Aqua and Erica talk about from their perspectives. So of course, I'm curious from where you sit in local governments, what was compelling to you? What goals did you have coming into this that you thought this framework could help you address? And Ben, I want to start with you.
Sure. And just what Erica and Aqua were saying really resonate with how we're kind of layering racial equity, but also connecting upward mobility to ending hunger, to other kind of ancillary outcomes for residents. And also, we also had the same push-pull with upward mobility and anti-poverty. So all the things that we were just talked about in the first panel really resonate. I think when this opportunity came out, the district and a lot of their city governments were kind of in the throes of the pandemic, and we had already been bringing together 20, 30 different agencies as part of an economic recovery team to think about how we respond to that pandemic through a couple of different lenses, one of them being resident investments and investments in our people, and how we start to close equity gaps that have been exposed and exacerbated during the pandemic. And the upward mobility cohort allowed us to take a little bit more of a reflective view and bring the, in district government and a lot of governments probably, there isn't one agency assigned to work on economic mobility. We share that burden across education, workforce, childhood education folks, economic development, small business. And we were able to use this as an opportunity to bring those folks together, and not with the goal of creating new programs or silver bullets, but to really look under the hood a bit and figure out what we were doing that was actually moving the needle on economic mobility. How could we evaluate those in the future? And could we introduce a new shared narrative about what upward mobility means, which was work that we had been doing for a long time, but perhaps a new definition and a new kind of set of phrases that was needed to be shopped around and talked to with our community a little bit more.
Yeah, that's great to hear, Ben. It sounds like similar to what Erica and Aqua were saying, this shared narrative was really helpful in a way to bring in folks that you knew had been doing this work for a long time and really investigate what are we already doing that fits well into this framework. Stephen, I'd love to hear from you next. What goals did you have coming into this, and why was this framework or this opportunity compelling to you?
Sure, thanks, Martha. Well, actually, it's interesting to hear what Ben was just saying, because similarly here in Alameda County, our organization, and as the pandemic was setting in, convened a lot of different folks, cross sectors from public, private, nonprofit, research, philanthropy, and other groups to sort of understand how things were transforming. And as the opportunity to pursue, the chance to be as part of the upward mobility cohort with Urban, we just saw that there was a lot of synergy with that. And just to sort of take a step back for a second, I think Alameda County it's just really, it's a place of just tremendous contrast. You know, we have incredible wealth in the midst of a lot of very challenging signals around poverty. We have a homeless count of over 9,000 people per the 2022 count. And but at the same time, we still have this philosophy that we can always do better, and we need to do better. None of us are making the kind of forward progress that we want to, hence we're all here today. But there, so there's a long legacy of movements around advancing economic mobility. In particular, our area is driven a lot by some specific drivers like housing costs, but we have really just stark divides along racial, ethnic, and geographic lines. And so, for us, we really thought that the framework was one that was really powerful to help us kind of have a galvanizing sort of force to help rally people around and really understand how we can better share and link, align, and leverage different resources and initiatives in a more cohesive way to really get to that point where we are helping to make a difference in the lives of people.
Yeah, thank you, Stephen. And I like what you said, that it helped you align and leverage resources. And again, I think what everyone is saying, really galvanize and move forward. Beth, I have a different question for you, which is, each of you went through this 18-month upward mobility planning process where we had you conduct data analysis. We had you look for additional data, not just to build off of the mobility metrics. We had you engage key stakeholders in your community. You did community engagement. All in service of learning more about conditions and in your community and priorities. And you all eventually put forth a set of strategies for how you could boost mobility from poverty and equity. So I guess I'd love to hear from you, Beth. What was the most challenging part of that work? And what was maybe the most valuable part of doing that and going through that process?
Sure. I think sometimes the most challenging things sometimes also turn out to be the most valuable. That's why they're hard, right? But I do think to figure out, so as Marjorie shared earlier, there's the definition there, and then there are multiple metrics, right? 25 different metrics. I'm not sure if it's the same number for the revised metrics, but it's a very holistic look at the challenges that we're facing and the opportunities to provide economic mobility. And that's a lot to grapple with, right? Like, doing that across multiple domains, across multiple departments, including community stakeholders from the nonprofit sector, and also figuring out how to bring in the voices of community members as individuals is a lot to take on. It's a lot to chew on. I think we talk a lot about breaking down silos, but sometimes we have silos for a reason. We have to hold our grain somewhere, right? And there's a reason why one department focuses on housing and another department focuses on economic development and another does something else. So figuring out how to find a way to both meaningfully engage with the metrics, meaningfully engage with multiple departments, with multiple stakeholders, and do it while we already have too much work on our plates was really challenging. But I think we figured out a way, and folks can check out our mobility action plan on our website. I'm sure there's probably a link in the chat to really guide us towards a bunch of operational recommendations that we think would apply to any department. That if we implemented them in the way that we approach our anti-poverty and our upward mobility work, we will be more effective. And just briefly includes improving our data collection, the way that we evaluate our programs, and doing better community engagement, and also breaking down the barriers that get in the way of people accessing public benefits and services. So whether your department does housing or social services or economic development, those things, if implemented, we think can strengthen that work towards upward mobility.
Yeah, thank you for that response, Beth. And I think it's exciting to hear that, although this framework is really focused on the what, going through this process really kind of led you all to think about operational improvements, which we know are so important. And I think to get to Ben's point earlier of so many of you are already doing this work. It's just a matter of how do you make kind of the tweaks you need to make to really refine and hone in what you're doing. So Ben, I'd like to ask the same question of you, again, reflecting on this 18-month period we spent together going through the upward mobility planning process, what was most challenging and what was most valuable for you?
Well, I definitely want to echo what Beth is talking about in terms of kind of hurting the agencies that are responsible for different elements of economic mobility. We had 15 agencies as part of this 18-month process. We also talked a lot to residents, maybe 500 residents through our 3 CBO partners throughout this process. And I think what we heard a lot was also, yes, we understand that DC government is doing a lot, and there are dozens of programs that theoretically help move the economic mobility needle for residents. What is actually working? Where do we find them, and how do those programs link together? And I think what we try to do as part of this process that was probably most valuable for me, as someone who loves frameworks and frameworks within frameworks, is we try to organize our programs by a couple of different buckets of economic mobility. One, what are those programs that initially help stabilize a family or a resident from falling into deeper poverty? What are those ones more moving the folks up the upward mobility ladder, moving them into the next echelons of their economic mobility journey? And that played back, it allowed us to play back the engagement feedback that we got from residents directly and show them, okay, here are the programs we have in district governments for you. And in your hypothetical economic mobility journey, here's how we would map out maybe how you would interact with these different programs, with these different agencies over the course of your economic mobility journey. And what that allowed us to do is, one, reflect back and show meaningful reflection on our engagement, which a lot of the TA assistants from Urban Institute there, but also show our agencies, you all have so many programs. We don't necessarily need another new program, but these actually have to link together, talk together. If the folks who are focusing on housing have to be able to have a warm handout to the folks who are thinking about education and childcare and workforce along an individual spectrum, we were able to, in our map, showcase a returning citizen, hypothetical, right? A returning citizen who is hoping to open his own business, a single mother who had lost her job but was trying to send her child through to college, and just a person experiencing homelessness who ultimately becomes a homeowner. What are the programs along that wide spectrum, along that multi-year journey that the district has that can help? And the next phase is really, are those helping? Are those, and evaluation, like Beth's point, is something that we pointed to as well. But being able to showcase what that journey looks like from a district set of programs example was really powerful for us, and then the resident feedback that we got.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And I think this is a little bit of your response responded to some of what Beth was saying, which is that like this work is so multifaceted. It covers many different policy domains, many different departments, many different organizations. And so I really appreciated the district's approach to say, you know, part of really making sure we can boost mobility from poverty is making sure that these programs that, you know, may exist in different departments are really speaking to each other, and that not just a behind the scenes and making sure that they're connecting seamlessly, you know, from an internal to government way, but that also from the resident side of things, that they understand, you know, the connection between these things and can access them. Stephen, I'd love to ask you the same question. What was the most valuable part of this? What was most challenging?
Sure. Yeah, I think, you know, like both Beth and Ben, you know, we too, I mean, we had a large number of different county agencies and departments and other groups that were involved in helping to put together our UMAP. And certainly, you know, right off the top, there was one of the things is that, you know, we started out in one direction in our plan, and I'm not going to get into the weeds about that, but sort of pivoted a few months in, because of the fact that, you know, as we got a little bit further along in our journey, what we really understood, and, you know, I mean, we sort of knew this at the beginning, but it became clearer and clearer as we got deeper into it. There were already such an array of different plans and initiatives and projects going on to really address this issue at its core that, you know, we spent a while just even trying to corral all the different blueprints that were out there to really move us in that direction. And that was also what helped us kind of get some momentum as we put that together, and really helped to sort of, again, organize and rethink the way in which we have, you know, framed up our plan, which is really around 4 areas of financial health, essential needs, employment and community wealth, and also cross-cutting systems change, which is really about having all these different agencies and departments that often are, as Beth said, in silos, and sometimes for very good reasons, also make sure that they're not blinded to everything else that's going on outside of them. And so that was a really key thing. You know, we had some very specific challenges in our county too, just around elected leadership. We had, unfortunately, the very untimely passing of one of our county supervisors. And so there were some other things that created some challenges just sort of at the leadership level. But on balance, you know, I think for us, just the work of getting all this together and really trying to pull all these pieces in a way that made sense and allowed it to be a cohesive document that other groups felt as though their work was being honored and recognized and not just sort of passed over or left as though it's just one more thing and we're moving on, I think was really important. So we really took the time to engage folks who are on the ground and in community to really make sure that we're looking at what's happening already and trying to build upon strengths and also move away from places that we were challenged.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Stephen. And you mentioned a crucial part of that upward mobility planning process, which is inventorying what you're already doing. And as you mentioned, starting with that and recognizing that so many have come before you, so many have very recently developed other plans that every single one of your communities is like simultaneously working on many plans in different departments, and the ability to recognize that, bring those folks in, leverage, and let folks know that that work is part of this bigger vision is a great way to kind of bring folks together and not be kind of yet again siloing things even further. Stephen, I do want to come back to you. So, we mentioned that we've heard you all mention the MAPs or the UMAPs. And for those of you that are new to this, a MAP is a mobility action plan or an upward mobility action plan. You each put forth a set of strategies at the end of this for how your community could create better conditions to really boost mobility from poverty and reduce racial inequities. And so was wondering if each of you could share just an example of a strategic action that you're proud of and you're working on. So Stephen, I'll start with you.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, there's actually a few that have been happening that we're feeling good about, especially in the work around just getting more coordination and collaboration. But what I'll point to right now is something that is not quite out on the street yet, so to speak, but very close. It's a project that we've been working on now for some time around recognizing kind of the changing nature and the future of work, specifically the way in which irregular work, or sometimes people want to refer to it as gig work, is really transforming the landscape, especially for low and middle income workers. And so we've been spending some time, with a lot of support from some other folks, including some colleagues down in Southern California who are running a pilot right now, where the gist of it is that it's creating work opportunities for folks in places where workers, rather than the buyer of labor, actually has agency in negotiating things like price, what they're willing to get paid, how much they're willing to work for, what their going rate is, basically to charge for services like childcare or other kinds of supports. And the idea is to really sort of turn gig work on its head and really put workers in the driver's seat so that they have agency in negotiating things like price, rate of pay, schedule, other kinds of ancillary things. And we're actually quite close to that. We have a number of partners on the ground that are getting ready to launch very soon with that project, and we feel like it actually has a lot of potential over time to really take off and transform the way work is, the way we continue to think about work. And I think in systems we tend to think about it very traditionally, but as we all know, it's a very rapidly changing landscape right now.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. That's incredibly exciting. How about you, Ben?
Yeah, I'm going to cheat and try and sneak two in here in a very short amount of time. But one of the things that we heard from our resident engagement and from our agencies also was improving the resident experience with interacting with DC government. We have 88 different agencies. We have numerous programs I've talked about already with their own applications, their own websites, their own phone numbers, and trying to amalgamate some of that into a central resident portal. And I'm proud that the Office of the Chief Technology Officer, the OCTO at DC government, is committed to this program, has funding for this program, and is starting to work on this in the same way that we've done in DC government, something we call Front Door, where we've taken all the programs for a potential or current homeowner and put it all into one place to make it very easy to access. The other one I'm going to sneak in here is everyone loves frameworks. I think sometimes we know that residents respond more to goals and potential partners respond more to big goals. And one of the things we wanted to do with the next iteration of work after the Mobility Action Plan was to come up with a citywide goal for economic mobility. And in our economic development strategy that we released in January called the Comeback Plan, the work of the upward mobility work and the engagement that went into it fed directly into the creation of a new goal for the city by 2028 to increase Black household income by $25,000 in the next 5 years. And to us, that married together a lot of the input that we got from the upward mobility work, as well as having a race-intentioned economic mobility overall goal in the same way that we do around housing, that we hope will serve as an invitation for both agencies, external partners, external investors to kind of move the economic mobility needle even more in the district.
That's super exciting, and I'm excited that it's great to see the district setting really bold goals for what you want to achieve in the future. Beth, I want to go to you for my last question. I'm going to change it up. And, you know, we all know that writing a plan and putting forth these strategies is really half the battle. The other half is actually implementing the recommendations you put forth. And that requires political will, that requires committed funds, that requires partnership. I'd love to hear from you. You know, what are some of those challenges you've had and how are you overcoming those? I think this is something that many on our calls experience, and definitely invite your candor in your response.
Sure. I'm going to try to answer both questions at the same time if I
Yeah.
could. So one of the things I'm really excited to be a part of right now is be part of a team that's working to kick off a zero fare program, a pilot program with our local transit agency. So Mayor Kenny proposed and City Council approved $60 million over 2 years to provide free transit access to 25,000 low-income Philadelphians. And as we get this off the ground, which is really complicated and difficult, we're really implementing the 4 key strategies that we made in the recommendations we made in the mobility action plan. We are using cities' data to be able to plan and develop the program, and also to do auto enrollment so that we can just send the cards to the 25,000 people that we know are eligible. So that advanced both our first and our 4th recommendation. We are building in the program evaluation, the evaluation that's not just about the program, I should say, but it's about the people who get access to the program. What happens and what is different in their lives because we gave this to them, and how does that measure against our goals for achieving economic mobility for folks? So that hits our 2nd goal. And then on our 3rd goal, improving the quality of equitable community engagement, we are doing community engagement as we build and design the program to hear from folks in the community about, so we can be making decisions now that will make the program most relevant to them. So I'm excited about that, but it's really hard, you know, to build a program while at the time implementing those strategies. There's a million hiccups along the way, and things don't work, and you know, lawyers tell you can't do this, and so that becomes hard. But I think it's practice, right? It's muscle that we're building. That as we develop it for this program and we improve it, we're going to be able to carry those same core 4 principles to the next project or program that we work on with a set of other departments. So I'm really excited about that, seeing that kind of come to life.
Yeah, thank you so much for that response. Stephen, how about you next? What are some of the challenges of actually doing this, implementing your recommendations, and how is Alameda County overcoming those?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, there's certainly, I think some of the things that Beth described are, you know, certainly not unique and exist here too. I think for us, it's really been about, you know, I think we can't overstate the, you know, sort of what we've all just been through in terms of the pandemic and how that actually influenced. I mean, to the previous question about sort of developing our plan and how the landscape continues to evolve. I mean, so many things are just happening at such a velocity right now that part of it's about keeping the focus about where we need to be versus just kind of moving on to the next thing. And so that's certainly part of it. I think the other thing, you know, the resource question is coming up a little more after having had, as we know, infusions of federal investments through CARES Act and then ARPA funds, you know, with those starting to fade a little bit. You know, there are some questions about how do we really kind of resource these and get more to the heart of some of the systems questions that really need to follow from these from our plan and from the recommendations we put forth.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I think your point around how do you keep this current moment and keep this momentum, especially given what we were talking about earlier, that there's always new plans and new things that need to be done, or new budgets that need to be passed and developed. So Ben, same question to you. And I think you and the district team did a little bit of thinking about how to overcome that specific challenge, but would love if you also want to speak to other challenges and how you're overcoming them.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the ways where we tried to keep the momentum going was through issuing a big district-wide goal, but with that comes a need for action and implementation in the next 5 years. And as Stephen was mentioning, a lot of big cities as well, you're facing a revenue crunch from the loss of ARPA dollars and from anything that you would normally get from a downtown that might be suffering from remote work. So there is a revenue crunch to invest, but I think some of the programs that were either piloted or started with ARPA dollars, those provided some really good lessons on how we direct better investment to residents directly. Maybe via things, I think there's a huge national movement around guaranteed cash pilot incomes, getting more residents funds, bringing down the cost of living for folks in different ways and creative ways. I know our budget in the last year provided some more money for cash transfer programs, for more money for reducing medical debt and different kinds of ways to reduce the economic burden on folks, while also thinking about, especially for big cities, our cost of living is higher. You know, so how do you get to, and to what Aqua was saying in the beginning, sometimes the poverty level is not the right line to mark us at, but also thinking about the cost of living line, the Alice living wage. So it raises the bar for us to action. And I think, Martha, one of the ways that we're trying to think about crossing that bridge is to understand that, one, it isn't just, in our case, the district government who are capable of making this kind of change. This is an open invitation for folks who are specialists in evaluation, who are specialists in who are philanthropists, who are interested in certain topics around home ownership or closing racial wealth gaps, to come under this one larger tent, this one umbrella, and work with us. And it doesn't have to be a district investment, a public funded program, as long as we're kind of marching to the same beat towards a common goal.
Yeah, I really appreciate that response, and the fact that you're talking about that this is really cross-sector work. We have to all do it together. We can't, no one actor can do this alone. I want to turn to an audience question. We got some great questions. Beth, I think I'm going to ask you this question first. How has the Upward Mobility Framework helped your organization better serve vulnerable populations, such as people experiencing homelessness, veterans, formerly incarcerated, and disabled individuals? What strategies have been most successful?
That's a great question. So one of the things I didn't have a chance to talk about was some of the work that we did around folks returning from incarceration and their housing needs as part of the Upward Mobility Project. So we were able to use the project to do some community engagement of folks who have returned from incarceration and are struggling to find decent, stable, and affordable housing. We did some focus groups, and we did some surveys as well to really hear from them. What are the challenges? What are the details about the challenges? I mean, we understood and knew some of them, but we really wanted to hear from them directly to both validate what we think we knew, but also challenge some of our assumptions as well. And we did learn a lot. I will say that we'll be releasing, I think, the results of those learnings and a series of recommendations sometime in the next couple of months. But I think it really did open my eyes to a few things that I didn't realize before in terms of challenges that people face finding housing when they're on probation, their ability to move, so residential mobility. So that is kind of leading us to want to look more both within our own department, but really collaborate with multiple departments that intersect with folks facing incarceration, their housing and their health and their stability, and see if we could come together as a team to make a series of recommendations to more significantly invest in their housing needs, knowing that that is absolutely critical for their reentry and their economic mobility.
And their belonging and
their
we know is an important part, and belonging and power and autonomy. Yes. Stephen, the same question to you, and this is going to be, I'm going to give you the last word. So how has this framework helped you serve vulnerable populations?
Well, I think just by having gone through really it's less about the plan itself, frankly, than the process that led to the development of the plan, because it really helped to, kind of reestablish trust where there may have been frayed trust, and not that there was necessarily in all places, but it certainly helped. And I think really it really helped to sort of accelerate and enhance collaboration across the board in terms of how do we coordinate with our different cities. We have 14 cities in Alameda County. Oakland's our largest city and our county seat. there's a lot of things that kind of run through Oakland, and there's a lot of need for us to make sure that as the county coordinates with that, we also don't overlook our other cities, because we have some other fairly large ones here as well. And really, because of it, we've been able to better coordinate and communicate with the different jurisdictions, and not just the cities, of course, too, but others that have purview of our residents and different assets.
Yeah, I appreciate you sharing that. And just want to thank all of our panelists so much for being here, sharing about your experience going on this journey with us. Your work is really inspiring, and I think it's helpful for others to see what you've been doing. So we appreciate your time and your candor with us today. So folks, don't sign off yet. We've got just a couple more minutes to close out our session today. I'd like to introduce Emma Fernandez from the Urban Institute team to talk about a new opportunity we have to help folks around the country boost mobility from poverty. Emma.
Great. Thanks so much, Martha. Thanks everyone for sticking with us. My name is Emma Fernandez. I'm a policy associate here at Urban, and I'm here to share a little bit about an upcoming technical assistance opportunity that we will have available for localities who are interested in diving more into this work. Before I get into those details, I want to mention there's a link in the chat you can use to sign up if you'd like to receive updates on this and future opportunities. So this technical assistance engagement will support localities in building capacity to address mobility challenges in their community, using the upward mobility framework, the mobility metrics, and the planning guide tools that we've discussed today. For this engagement, we will be asking applicants to apply as a local partnership comprised of government and non-government actors, which could include nonprofits, community-based organizations, collective impact groups, academic institutions, and others. So over 12 months, we'll provide scheduled workshops and one-on-one calls with participants. And we'll also have an emphasis on peer learning in small groups so that localities can connect with others who are doing similar work. We plan to release the solicitation for this opportunity in the coming weeks. And the planned dates for the engagement are October 2023, this fall, through October 2024, one calendar year. So again, you can use the QR code on your screen or the link in the chat to sign up to receive Upward Mobility Project updates. And we'll share the application for the this opportunity that I was sharing about through that email list. You can also sign up to receive updates about future project work and future public tools that we have coming up. And with that, we will wrap up today's event. Thank you so much to our partners at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and to our wonderful speakers for joining us and for sharing their work today. And thank you all for joining, and have a great day.